My name is Marcus Ellery, and as I stand in the harsh glare of the morning sun against the side of my apartment building, I feel the weight of being forgotten settle in my bones like a stone in my pocket. I'm the older twin by 4 minutes, but in the stories my family tells, the memory of being born first barely even registers. Julian came out with a wail that stole everyone's breath, and from that moment on his life was a parade. Handsome, athletic, charming. Those words are the ones they still whisper about him whenever they gather. Me? I was always the footnote, the shadow, the twin they forgot. I built my world in code and cables and servers, a place where faces blur and names matter less than function and uptime. In that realm I have control, and it never judges me for failing to score a touchdown or nail the perfect smile. It just works. After my divorce from Riley, they said I was a burden. I remember the way my mother's lips tightened when she spoke about Riley's departure, the precise way her voice clipped the word burden, as though it were something she'd been taught to say. After my fertility diagnosis, they said I was broken. My father's shoulders sagged when he recounted how a doctor's report had marked me infertile, like a defect in a machine. And when I stopped visiting, they told each other that I was ungrateful, that I held a grudge, that I preferred to nurse my wounded ego rather than share a holiday meal. None of them ever asked whether I might prefer solace to silence or dignity to forced dinner conversations. But what they never knew was that I'd been building something quietly, deliberately. While they celebrated Julian's victories, his scholarships, his marriage proposal in the Rose Garden, I was at my desk in a dimly lit home office, putting the finishing touches on Silent Echo, a channel born out of my own need, a digital home for men dealing with emotional abuse, betrayal, and self-doubt. My hands had trembled the first time I opened a live stream, my voice crackling through the microphone as I shared the story of how my own family had pushed me aside. And yet within days, strangers reached out, messages of gratitude, of solidarity, of survival. I'd never imagined that my pain could forge connections. Now I knew it could. Today is the first time I bring Silent Echo out of the basement glow of my screen and into the daylight of my life. My heart pounds in my chest like an old engine trying to turn over. I wear my black suit because I need no distractions, no splashy ties or pocket squares to mask the calm purpose I feel growing inside me. Behind my lens, I am a technician, a creator, and in front of it, I will become something else. A witness. I adjust the camera's angle one last time. The light flares like a promise or a warning. I'm not sure which. My phone buzzes, my trigger for going live. 20 seconds. 10. 5. The little red dot blinks alive, and I hear my own voice announcing, "Hello, everyone. Marcus Ellery here. I'm live." The counter climbs already. 10 viewers. 20. I hold my breath. This is not for me alone anymore. This is for the men who never get invited to the family table, the sons who never made the highlight reel, the partners cast aside like debris when a marriage or a bond became inconvenient. I clear my throat. The screen behind me flickers to life, showing the small green icon that means we are connected, we are present, we are not alone. My first words are a confession. I'm the older twin by 4 minutes, and I've spent most of my life in the shadow of my brother. I pause, letting the silence carry the weight of a lifetime of comparisons. They said I was quiet. They said I was agreeable. They said I never pushed back. But what they heard as compliance was my own refusal to fight battles I knew I could not win under their rules. When Julian's accomplishments filled every room, my own achievements, my work in IT, went unnoticed. After my divorce, after my fertility diagnosis, they told me my life was broken. They told me I was a burden. They never asked if I was hurting. Messages scroll in the chat. I get you. Thank you for this. You're not alone. My throat tightens. I almost choke on the emotion, but I press on. For a long time, I believed them. Every whispered judgment felt like a wound. But I stopped believing when I realized I wasn't the only one. I found thousands of men who felt discarded, diminished, erased. And together, we started Silent Echo. I leaned forward, the grain of the wooden desk under my palms warming me. I built this channel not as a vanity project, but as a home, a place to share stories, to offer tools and resources, to remind each other that our worth isn't dictated by fertility tests or family expectations. I sip water, letting the sound underscore my next thought. I'm not here to ask for their acceptance. I'm here to show them that they already have mine. In that moment, I feel my old doubts dissolve. The memory of being ignored at family gatherings, of hearing Julian's name always first, of watching Riley walk away with a suitcase of my hopes. All of it shrinks beneath the truth I speak now. I'm strong enough to build a community of survivors. I'm capable of rewriting my own narrative. And for the first time, I know I'm not the brother they forgot. I'm the founder of something that matters. I end the stream and sit back, the quiet hum of my computer the only sound. On the screen, viewer counts sit in the thousands. Comments recount how they saw themselves in my story. Donations pop up, small and large, building the foundation for the quiet uprising, my nonprofit born from this moment. I close my eyes and breathe. The weight of that stone in my pocket is gone. I stand and step into the light, ready to face whatever comes next, because this time, they'll never forget me. The gilded envelope sat on my desk for 3 days before I dared open it. I stared at the thick parchment, embossed with Julian's name and an intricate monogram that seemed to mock me with its elegance. My mother had called 2 days before, her voice syrupy with false concern. "Try not to make this about you, Marcus," she warned. "Let Julian shine." I almost laughed aloud at that, because I hadn't spoken my own name aloud in my family's real conversations for over a year. Let him shine. They'd been shining his entire life on my dim, overlooked existence. I'd learned long ago that if I tried to interrupt their celebration, they'd simply retreat into polite silence and pretend I didn't exist. On the morning of the wedding, I dressed in the charcoal gray suit I'd bought for Riley's departure, the one I'd never worn. It hung slightly loose, the sleeves just brushing my wrists, as though it, too, was slack in its commitment to hold me together. I looked at myself in the mirror. Neat hair, crisp shirt, tie knotted in a perfect Windsor. And I felt nothing but a low hum of resolve. I didn't need to be charming or athletic or handsome. I needed to be seen. I slipped my phone into my breast pocket, the live stream app already queued, and imagined the flash of the camera witnessing me rather than hiding me. The Silvercrest Grand spread before me like a fairy tale castle, its manicured lawns and marble columns promising a day of opulence. A black limousine eased onto the gravel drive, and the chauffeur opened my door with a nod. Family Table 9, where I would sit, they decided, was tucked in a corner close to the kitchen swinging doors, just far enough from the bride and groom to be conspicuous but unseen. I'd memorized the layout months ago when I'd scoped the venue online, but this was my first time stepping inside. The banquet hall shimmered with chandeliers dripping crystals like tears, tablecloths embroidered with golden thread, and a sea of white roses arranged in towering vases. Everywhere I looked, someone was beaming for Julian. My father, Ronald, intercepted me with an arm around my shoulder, his grip loose like a question mark. "Still fixing people's computers?" He chuckled. I forced a polite smile. "I still am," I said softly. He gave a dismissive grunt. "Well, try to keep the tech stuff to a minimum today. We're here for family." I nodded, but this family was the problem. They treated me as if my silence was a sign of weakness, as if my absence at gatherings proved I didn't care. They never saw how carefully I had crafted my absence, how I rehearsed every word I would eventually speak. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and tears. When the reception began, I found my seat at table 9. My place card stared back at me. E. Marcus Ellery. D4, Ellery, almost losing my first name in the shuffle of identity. Celeste smiled thinly from across the table, glancing at me before turning her attention back to Julian. "Isn't it wonderful?" she whispered to her neighbor. I watched her lips purse. "Marcus, try not to be a distraction." Her voice had the brittle quality of porcelain. I clenched my hands under the table, resisting the urge to respond. My silence would be my statement, until it wasn't. Dinner commenced with polite chatter and forced laughter, but I barely touched my food. My mind circled around Silent Echo and the 1.2 million subscribers waiting for today's broadcast. My ex-wife's name in the guest book had confirmed my plan. She was here, complicit in this charade. Every carefully curated plate of salmon and asparagus felt like another insult from my family's table. They had taught me to hide my pain, to swallow it down with bites of guilt-laden dinner rolls. Tonight, that ended. I excused myself, standing slowly so as not to draw immediate attention. The room hushed as all eyes slid toward me. Familial curiosity, sparked by my rare motion. I walked toward the far wall where the service area hid a small AV closet, my black shoes clicking on polished marble. Inside, I closed the door and discovered a tangle of cords and panels. With practiced ease, I switched the projector's input from the wedding playlist to my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and I felt the familiar thrill when the livestream icon glowed red. Live to 1. 2M viewers. Julian's best man burst in, face pale. "Marcus, what are you doing?" he whispered harshly. I tapped the Start Broadcast button without looking up. "Giving everyone what they came for," I said. He backed away, uncertain. I grabbed the mic from the lectern and opened the door. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, voice steady over sudden electronic crackle. "I'd like to share a few words about family." A hush fell across the room. The projector sprang to life behind me, flickering to display the silent Echo logo. I watched my mother's eyes widen, then narrow. My father's jaw clenched. Servers paused mid-step, trays of champagne froze. The dignity my family prized so highly shattered in that instant. I lifted my chin. "My name is Marcus Ellery. You've assigned me to Table 9, as if I were an afterthought. You've treated me as if my life and pain were a joke. Well, tonight I've decided to take my silence and turn it into something louder than any laughter I've ever endured." The screen behind me filled with comments streaming in from strangers offering support. "You've been silent too long," one read. "We see you now," another. The murmurs grew, a collective pulse echoing through the marble halls more forceful than any vows declared an hour ago. I held the mic like it was a lifeline or a weapon, both truth and bullet in one. I built silent echo for men like me, men who were told they were broken, unworthy, invisible. I did not ask for this platform, but I accepted it. Because if I couldn't have a family that heard me, I would build a family who would. By the time I stepped down, the air was thick with stunned silence and fierce applause from my online community. My mother turned away, her cheeks flushed. My father looked as though he had swallowed a bitter pill. Julian stood rooted to the spot, his perfect smile gone. I returned to my seat at Table 9, my heart racing, and sat down, finally seen, finally heard, finally free. The reception unfolded beneath glittering chandeliers, each crystal prism casting fleeting rainbows across the marble floor as if the universe were mocking the fabricated perfection before me. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, embraced only by the chill of indifference. Silvercrest Grand was lavish in every detail. A sweeping courtyard framed by cypress trees, carved gargoyles perched above doorways, and lush gardens that had whispered conversations. Yet despite the splendor, every heart in that room beat for my brother Julian. He stood at the center of the ballroom, resplendent in his custom-tailored tuxedo, greeting guests with the practiced charm that had made him the family's golden child. I wore a black suit of my own choosing, simple and unembellished, the darkness of fabric mirroring the resolve I had carried in silence for so long. No flash, no fuss, just presence. My father, Ronald, intercepted me as I approached the hors d'oeuvres table. He offered a limp handshake, his eyes flickering with polite obligation. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked, though his tone made it clear that I'd have to find my own enjoyment. I met his gaze squarely. "I'm taking it all in," I replied quietly, my voice steady enough to belie the storm inside me. He cleared his throat and turned away, leaving me to mingle. Servers in crisp white jackets offered trays of smoked salmon and caviar spoons, but each bite tasted like ash. I nibbled only a few scraps, mindful to save my strength. This night was far from over, and I would need every ounce of control to follow through. I drifted toward the head table where Julian's parents and in-laws were seated. An unspoken command that I remain at a respectful distance from the couple as they basked in adoration. My mother, Celeste, wore a silver gown that caught the light whenever she shifted, but her features were pinched with anxiety. She glanced at me only once before turning back to her conversation, as though my presence were a blemish she could barely tolerate. I reminded myself that I was here for more than validation. I was here to claim my story, to expose the cracks beneath the veneer of celebration. At the far wall, a cluster of audio-visual equipment hummed behind a velvet curtain. A projector, soundboard, and cables snaked like silent vipers, awaiting their moment. I had spent weeks coordinating with the venue's technicians under the guise of helping to pass along playlist requests. They thought I was simply ensuring the happy couple's chosen tracks would play seamlessly. They didn't know I had uploaded a specially edited presentation to the server, timed to begin after dessert. My phone in my pocket glowed with readiness. The live stream set to waiting, the camera lens pointed at the lectern where I would later stand. Underneath crisp formality, I held a weapon fashioned from truth. Music swelled as the ceremony shifted into the evening's main event. A quartet of strings played softly in the corner, and the guests watched the newlyweds sway on a small stage. Julian's smile was blinding, his arm around his wife as they moved in perfect harmony. I stood behind the last row of chairs, heart pounding in rhythm with the violins. For a moment, I felt like an intruder in someone else's fantasy. But this fantasy was built on lies, on the effortless erasure of my existence and the celebration of someone else's scripted joy. I had waited too long to remain unseen. When the last note faded, the MC stepped forward to introduce the slideshow tribute. He clicked a remote, and the projector cast the first image onto the screen, a childhood snapshot of Julian in a Little League uniform, mud-stained and triumphant. Laughter and applause rippled through the room. Slide after slide followed. Prom night, graduation, engagement, each frame a testament to the narrative my family cherished. I saw myself only as a missing piece in the sequence, a gap where my own memory should have appeared. My jaw clenched, and I glanced at the digital clock on my phone. 2 minutes until go time. I slipped sideways along the wall toward the audiovisual closet, the sound of applause building behind me. Technicians exchanged quiet remarks about the seamless transitions, their words underscoring my deception. I swapped the playlist USB with my own flash drive, the click of metal more satisfying than any confrontation. The file bore the title truthforall.mp4. I could feel the collective anticipation as the MC prepared to go on. This was the moment chosen to honor Julian, the moment I would hijack. My ex-wife Riley's name in the guest book had been my catalyst. She sat at a neighboring table, her posture tense, her eyes scanning for me between sips of champagne. I knew the shock of seeing her name broadcast alongside mine would fracture her composure. She had told me once that she left because she loved me too much to watch me break. Tonight, I would remind her that I had not broken. I had been rebuilding. The MC cleared his throat. And now, a tribute to the groom. The screen flickered, but instead of the next photo of Julian, it displayed a loading bar mapped to my live stream count. Phones in pockets buzzed. Servers paused with trays aloft. I emerged from the closet holding the microphone, the hush of 300 guests swallowing the remaining chords of chamber music. Good evening, I began, voice clear and calm. My name is Marcus Ellery, and I'd like to share my perspective. A collective gasp swelled, and the projector switched fully to my feed, the silent echo logo, the subscriber count ascending rapidly. Murmurs turned to stunned silence. I raised my chin, locking eyes with Celeste and Ronald, with Julian, with Riley. You've paraded my brother's triumphs for years and made me the forgotten twin. You've mocked my life as a divorcee, a man rendered infertile by words of doctors and family alike. Tonight, I'm turning your celebration into a reckoning. Behind me, slides began to flick through clips of my videos, testimonies from men who once felt invisible, screenshots of private messages naming me their hero, captions of solidarity from across the world. The steady rise of the viewer count morphed into an unassailable testament, 1,200,000 and climbing. I felt a surge of strength, the validation of strangers more potent than any hollow praise I'd ever sought from blood relatives. In that moment, I realized that belonging to a family of strangers who saw me mattered more than living as a ghost in my own bloodline. I never looked back at their stunned faces. My attention was on the screen and on the knowledge that for every mocking laugh Julian had ever provoked, I had mobilized an army of voices determined to listen. An army born from the silence I refused to maintain. As the slides continued, I knew the setup was complete. The space had shifted. The narrative I inherited was ending, and the one I was writing, one of truth, resilience, and reclamation, had just begun. Midway through dessert, I felt the tension in the room tighten like a drawn bow. Plates of vanilla panna cotta and chocolate ganache set half-eaten, ignored in favor of stolen glances toward the projector screen. I had returned to table 9, but I never really sat. I hovered, body rigid, senses primed for what would come next. The air was thick with polite chatter until the master of ceremonies' voice cut through like a scalpel. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the screen for a special slideshow tribute to the groom. A ripple of applause followed, but it was hollow, a reflex. I knew what this meant. The carefully curated montage of Julian's golden moments would soon wash over us in a wave of nostalgia, so blinding that no one would see what lay beneath. The lights dimmed, and the first image flickered to life. 7-year-old Julian hitting a home run that raised triumphantly above his head as cheering teammates surrounded him. I felt the dull ache of exclusion twist in my chest. I wasn't in the photo. Our likenesses had always been edited with care, as though including me would blemish the perfection. When the next slide glowed, Julian in his high school cap and gown, beaming under the midday sun, I noticed my mother's pleased smile, the warmth in her eyes reserved only for him. The sequence continued. Prom night tuxedo, college graduation handshake with the dean, the moment he dropped to one knee to propose, each frame a testament to a life sold as storybook magic. My own existence might as well have been erased. Then, without warning, the screen flickered, and the music abruptly cut. A collective murmur swept through the room. Technical difficulties, the MC quipped nervously, glancing at the projection booth. I remained still, heart slamming against my ribs, waiting for the unexpected to become the unforgettable. The projector blinked again, then launched into my own slideshow, a single line of bold white text on a black background. And now, a moment for my twin. The room fell silent as Julian stood, confusion twisting his features. The next slide appeared, and a hush heavier than fear settled over us all. Marcus Ellery, infertile, divorced failure, high school dropout, low income, no wife. Laughter crackled like shrapnel. My brother's grin spread across his face, triumphant, as though he'd just landed the perfect punchline. My mother's cry of amusement rose like a vulture's cackle, and my father's bark of laughter rattled the crystal glasses. The MC stammered, searching for a transition, any escape from the cruelty masked as humor. But I saw only red, not rage, but the searing clarity of truth. This was the story they had always told behind closed doors, the narrative that justified my removal from every family portrait. They thought they were safe, cocooned in their elite ballroom, shielded from the world outside. They were wrong. I rose from my chair, the camera's red light glowing steadily in my breast pocket, its lens aimed at me. The room froze, faces turning to look at the spectacle I had unleashed. I didn't speak immediately. I let the laughter peter out into uncomfortable coughs, let the echoes of mockery ricochet against the marble walls until silence reigned. Then I reached into my jacket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen. The live stream began, and the counter climbed. 10,000 viewers. 50,000. 200,000. I pressed the microphone to my lips and exhaled. Good evening, I said, voice calm yet laden with unspoken years of restraint. My name is Marcus Ellery, and apparently tonight I'm your entertainment. Guests followed, not of intrigue, but of shock. Julian's face paled, his bride buried her eyes in her hands. My mother turned away, lips pressing into a thin line. I felt the power shift beneath me, a subtle quake that loosened the ground they had built their lives on. You all laughed when you saw those words. I continued, gesturing toward the screen behind me, now replaying the slide in an endless loop. You found humor in my pain, in my life reduced to medical terms and marital status, in every disparaging label you could bandy about. But what you don't see is the cost of that so-called joke. I paused, letting the words hang like smoke. I looked directly at my brother, his perfect posture and tailored tuxedo suddenly ridiculous amidst the unraveling facade. You thought this would break me. You thought turning me into a punchline would silence me forever. I tapped the screen again, and the slideshow shifted to a still image of my ex-wife, Riley, staring at me in our living room, tears glistening in her eyes. Beneath it, a caption, "You left because our family broke you down." A collective breath escaped the audience. Shock, recognition, guilt. Here's the reality, I said, stepping forward so that the projector light cast my shadow across the screen, larger than life. Every time you cheered my failures, you reinforced the belief that I didn't deserve happiness. After my divorce, you whispered that I was a burden. After learning I couldn't father children, you called me broken. And when I withdrew, you said I was ungrateful. My voice cracked with the weight of confession, and I embraced that vulnerability. I carry those words with me every day. But tonight, I carry something else, your reckoning. Behind me, the live stream count surged past 1 million. 1,050,000. 1,100,000. Comments flowed in from every corner of the globe. He deserves better. Thank you for your courage. We stand with you. I felt invisible chains shatter, the silent applause of strangers washing over me like sunlight after a storm. I turned to my family, their faces drained of color. This is what happens when you weaponize love, I said softly. When you choose to humiliate rather than heal. You might have worn those words like armor, but they became the shrapnel that wounded you as well. My father opened his mouth, but no sound came. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Julian's shoulders slumped, guilt eclipsing his earlier arrogance. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the silence roar before I ended the broadcast. For everyone out there who has ever felt like a footnote, a failure, a ghost, know this. You have a voice, and it deserves to be heard. The screen went dark, the projector returned to wedding fare, but the room remained suspended in a space between before and after. I stepped back to table 9, where my chair awaited as though nothing had changed, yet everything had. I sat, heart pounding, and watched them process the truth they had never wanted illuminated. Tonight, the slide had shattered their silence, and mine, I realized, would never be broken again. When the projector went dark and the polite clink of silverware resumed its eerie echo, I felt a surge of adrenaline reminding me why I had come, not simply to embarrass a family, but to reclaim my own story. My brothers, my parents, even Riley, all of them thought the worst had passed. They'd seen their slide, heard their whispers exposed, and retreated into stunned silence. But in that pregnant pause, I realized my moment had only just begun. I stepped away from table 9, mobile phone in hand, and crossed the dance floor toward the main stage, where the microphone still stood waiting, like an old friend eager for my next words. The ballroom lights dimmed further as my approach caught the attention of the remaining guests. Waiters hovered, unsure whether to pour another round or clear the debris of dessert plates. I lifted the mic and waited for the hush to settle, letting the residual shock hang in the air. Then I tapped the side of my phone, and the projector flickered back to life, this time with the familiar red "Live" icon pulsing in the upper corner. The counter beside it ticked upward with real-time precision. 250, 000. 300, 000. 500,000. My heart hammered in my chest. 500,000 people, strangers who'd logged in to watch a wedding slideshow, were now witnesses to my truth. I cleared my throat. Hello, everyone. My name is Marcus Ellery, I began, voice steady despite the swirling emotions beneath. The room leaned in, their collective breath held between disbelief and curiosity. By now you've seen the less flattering side of my life. A fertility diagnosis, a divorce, a career in IT that my father thinks unworthy of pride. I paused, imagining the bruise those words might sting upon their consciences. But that side isn't the whole story. Behind me, the screen shifted to my channel's homepage, Silent Echo, the name bold against a dark backdrop, flanked by subscriber badges and a thriving comment feed scrolling in real time. 2 years ago, I continued, I started this channel in the basement of my apartment. No audience, no sponsors, just raw confession. I posted the first video because I was tired of hiding my pain. I uploaded a clip about how family dinners became minefields, and how every glance from the people who were supposed to love me felt like barbed wire. I didn't expect more than a handful of views. The viewer count jumped 600, 000. 700,000. I smiled, a flicker of triumph in my chest. But then one man messaged me. I thought I was alone. You gave me hope. Then another. I've felt this every day. I thank you. And slowly, one by one, strangers found their way here. Today, we're 2 million strong. The words crackled through the speakers, and I turned slightly so I could see the stunned expressions on every face in the audience. Friends of Julian, colleagues of my parents, wedding guests who'd only come for cake and champagne. They watched as I reclaimed the narrative of my life, piece by piece. They told me I was broken. I said, voice growing firmer. But I learned that scars don't define you. They show you've survived. I tapped the screen again, and the slideshow transitioned to short video clips, men sharing their stories, tears of grief turning into tears of relief. A caption scrolled at the bottom, "You are not alone." I gestured toward the screen. Each of these voices is a testament to resilience. Each view, each comment, each donation, they're not numbers. They're human lives finding solidarity in the echo of my story. And that is something my family never gave me. A chorus of murmured, "Wow," and "Incredible" rose from the crowd. I felt a gentle warmth spread through my chest, the knowledge that truth had power beyond any family's whispered judgments. Then I shifted focus. But what truly brought me here tonight isn't just to celebrate our digital community, it's to hold my family accountable for the words they wielded like weapons. I pressed a button, and the video paused on a still frame of Julian's mocking text message to Riley. "He's weak. You can do better." Underneath, her response, "You're right." The silence that followed was absolute. My brother's face drained of color. Our parents exchanged helpless looks. "Julian," I said quietly, "you thought your insults would bury me. Instead, they fueled this movement." "Thank you." I allowed a small, rueful smile. Then I turned to Riley, who sat at her table with tears in her eyes. "Riley, you said you left because you couldn't watch me break." "I understand that now." "Because I almost did. But I'm not broken. I'm building." Behind me, the screen showcased the banner for the Quiet Uprising, my nonprofit dedicated to supporting survivors of emotional abuse. Logos of partner organizations, images from fundraising events, statistics of men assisted, all scrolled before the stunned guests. "Tonight," I said, voice soft but unwavering, "I'm here not only for me, but for every person who felt too ashamed to speak. Because your silence only ensures you remain invisible." The viewer count ticked upward. 950, 000, 1, 000, 000, and then settled at 1,200,314 as applause erupted from my online community. In the ballroom, the reaction was slower, tentative at first, then swelling into genuine appreciation from a handful of guests who stood and clapped, unsure of what they'd witnessed, but sensing its importance. I inhaled deeply, letting the moment anchor itself in my memory. I had exposed their cruelty, yes, but I had also offered them the chance to witness redemption. I concluded, "To my family, this isn't just spectacle. It's your opportunity to change. To see me not as the failure you wished me to be, but as a man worthy of respect." The silence that fell carried weight of remorse and introspection. I stepped away from the microphone, my task complete. As I walked back to table 9, I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone buzzed with messages thanking me, encouraging me, pledging support. I glanced once more at the screen. 1.2 million had heard my voice tonight. In that chorus of affirmation, I found my triumph. And I knew, finally, that being heard was my greatest victory of all. I had always painted my divorce from Riley as the inevitable collapse of a mismatched union, a narrative my family savored because it fit their tidy view of me as the broken twin. But tonight, behind the glimmering chandeliers and under the weight of a million witnesses, I needed to tell the truth in full color. The real story began on a rainy Thursday afternoon 6 months before their wedding, when Riley and I sat in our living room while the sky wept against the windows. I had just returned from a meeting, head buzzing with a new partnership for Silent Echo, and I carried with me more than my laptop bag. I carried a burgeoning sense of purpose I had never felt before. Riley had been quieter than usual, her eyes shadowed with something that hurt me more than any harsh word could. "Marcus," she said, voice small, "we need to talk." I remember the way her hair curled damply around her collar when I sat beside her on the couch. She fiddled with the sleeve of her sweater, the one I'd given her for Christmas. "I watched your latest live stream," she began, "and I saw you, alive." Her hand trembled as it reached for mine, and for a moment I thought she'd be proud of my growth. Instead, she whispered, "I fell in love with the silent you who waited to speak. Now I see you're not waiting anymore." Her words were gentle, but they cut deep because they marked the end of the quiet bond we'd shared. I squeezed her hand, asking what she meant, but she only shook her head and let tears slip down her cheeks. "I can't watch you break every day," she said. "I can't be your witness anymore." That night, I walked her to the door in the rain, each drop a quiet applause for the life we once hoped to build. Riley hugged me long and close, as if imprinting my shape into her mind before letting me go. We never raised our voices. There were no slams of doors or indignant accusations, only the steady drizzle of truth dissolving the foundation of our love. The next morning, I found her note. "I need to find someone who stands beside me, not someone who must break to be heard." There were no regrets, no second chances, only the echo of her footsteps leaving my apartment as the door clicked shut. In the weeks that followed, my family spoke of the divorce as though it were my failure by design. They called Riley courageous for leaving the fragile twin, and they nodded sympathetically when I stood silent at family gatherings. They told themselves I would learn to endure, that time heals everything. But they never asked what I endured while time ticked away. The emptiness of our bed, the echo of her goodbye in every corner of the apartment, the hollow ache that replaced our shared dreams. Their laughter at my expense in that ballroom tonight stemmed from the same impulse that allowed them to celebrate Julian's achievements without ever acknowledging the person sitting at the other end of the table. So as the projector behind me switched to that grainy video clip of my therapy session, I felt both vulnerable and triumphant. My voice cracked when I said, every time I succeeded, they moved the goalpost. Every time I failed, they cheered. The camera captured the moment my composure unraveled, tears springing to my eyes as I confessed, I was so tired of being invisible, of carrying my own shame because they refused to see me. In that clip, I wasn't the model of calm professionalism I showed the world. I was a man laid bare, a man who had loved and lost, and still found the courage to speak the unvarnished truth. The room went still as the clip ended. I saw Riley's face in the crowd, her expression a mixture of sorrow and awe. I realized then that she hadn't fled from my pain, but from the fear that I would never choose myself over their verdict. By stepping onto this stage, I was reclaiming not only my story, but the dignity Riley had feared I couldn't protect. I wasn't broken. I had simply been unheard. I lifted my chin and addressed every person present. The real story of my divorce isn't one of failure. It's one of growth. It's the story of a man who discovered his worth outside the opinions of others. It's the story of a man who learned that losing someone who couldn't stand by your side might be the best thing that ever happened to him. My heart pounded as I watched comprehension dawn on faces that had only moments before mocked my suffering. The air shifted, charged with the electricity of revelation, my revelation. Then I showed them the messages Riley had sent in private. I'm sorry I wasn't the partner you needed. I see you now. Those words, once a source of guilt, now became a testament to the power of truth. I told them, Riley, you helped me find my voice. You released me from the shackles of their expectations. The spotlight that had once exposed my weaknesses now illuminated my strongest self. As the projection faded and I returned to table 9, I felt a sense of closure I had never known. The real story of my divorce had been waiting to be told, and tonight I had delivered it to the world. No longer a broken footnote in my family's narrative, I stood firm in my truth, unbowed, unapologetic, and ready for whatever came next. Julian's face contorted in outrage as I finished speaking, the elegant lines of his tuxedo suddenly absurd against the bruised expression he wore. This is disgusting. You're ruining my day, he shouted, voice cracking like a whip across the marble floor. His words rang hollow in my ears. I had already heard worse whispered behind closed doors. I met his glare steadily, unaffected by the collective shock sweeping through the ballroom. Around us, guests shifted uneasily. Their expressions danced between fascination and discomfort, uncertain which version of reality they had signed up to witness. I held the microphone with a calm authority, each syllable measured, unhurried. You mocked my life in front of 300 people tonight, I responded, voice low but clear enough to split the silence like a blade. I'm simply responding in front of 1.2 million. As the final dregs of their laughter died away, I felt the momentum shift beneath my feet. I pressed a button on my phone, and the projector flickered back to life, this time revealing a series of text messages exchanged between Julian and Riley, timestamped 6 months before our divorce. The screen displayed our private conversations for the world to see, every pixel a testament to betrayal. Julian's name hovered above his words. He's weak. You can do better. Below, Riley's response glowed in icy blue. You're right. I need more. A collective intake of breath echoed through the hall. A murmur spread like wildfire, from the head table to the farthest corners of the guest area. Some guests covered their mouths in stunned disbelief. Others stared with incredulous eyes at the evidence of my brother's cruelty. Julian's best man, his lifelong friend and guardian of secrets, staggered back a step, as though he'd been struck by unseen force. His face drained of color, and he glanced from the screen to Julian, unable to find words in the wreckage of his own allegiance. I felt a weight lift from my chest, replaced by the electrifying clarity of vindication. The burden of unspoken hurt, the invisible scars I carried from every sideways glance and whispered insult, crystallized before my family and our assembled acquaintances. I paused, allowing the gravity of the moment to settle over them, heavy as a storm cloud. Every embellished wedding favor, every clink of crystal champagne flutes, dissolved into irrelevance. What remained was the raw exposure of Julian's complicity in my unraveling, a betrayal more painful than any divorce decree. I turned my gaze to Riley, seated not far from the head table, her eyes shining with tears that reflected 1,000 unspoken apologies. When I met her gaze, I saw not shame but solidarity, a recognition that we both had been wounded by the same spear of deceit. "You broke my marriage," I said, letting the words carry the full force of accusation. "And you did it thinking I wouldn't fight back." I took a deliberate step forward, bridging the space between my broken past and the audience I had gathered to confront it. My voice rose, imbued with conviction. "You assumed your insults would shatter me into silence. You assumed I would cower beneath your ridicule, that I would forever remain the timid twin afraid to speak his mind. You were wrong." Behind me, the dam of viewer comments burst open. "He's right. Justice served." Finally, the truth. The real-time heartbeat of 1.2 million witnesses echoed around me, a roaring wave of empathy and support that dwarfed the hollow triumph of any family lineage. Julian rose from his chair, the fabric of his tuxedo rustling as if protesting his movement. His face was ashen, the confident mask he wore moments ago shattered beyond repair. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound emerged. His wedding day, once the pinnacle of his achievements, had morphed into a crucible of accountability. I watched him struggle, shoulders hunched. The man who once stood unchallenged in the center of every gathering now reduced to a silhouette of guilt. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Some rose in solidarity, while others remained frozen in seats that had suddenly become oppressive cages of conscience. I lowered the microphone, letting the silence swell between us like a held breath. In that moment, I recognized the full power of truth. It can shatter illusions more convincingly than any argument, and it can free the speaker more thoroughly than any apology. Around me, whispers of, "I didn't know," and "this changes everything" drifted like motes in a sunbeam. My parents sat at the head table, eyes downcast, their faces etched with realization that the sons they had elevated and denigrated were now standing on vastly uneven ground, one bruised but unbowed, the other triumphant, yet undone. My heart pounded not with triumph over Julian's humiliation, but with the certainty that I had finally stepped into my own power. The cold calculations of my family, the derisive praise of those who sought to belittle me. All had culminated in this singular moment of reckoning. I glanced at Riley once more, silently thanking her for her courage in confronting her own role in my story. Then I turned back to the assembled guests, raising my voice to fill the space with unflinching resolve. "Let this be a lesson," I declared, "that the truth, once spoken, can no more be unspoken than the wind can be unbreathed. We all have the choice to tear each other down or to lift each other up. Tonight, I chose my own voice." With those closing words, the room held a collective exhale, a release of tension that felt like the dawn breaking after a long, oppressive night. I stepped away from the lectern, the echoes of 1.2 million voices resonating in my ears, and returned to table 9. Every step was lighter than the one before, as if each footfall carried away a layer of old shame. Julian remained motionless, his shoulders slumped, no longer the favored son, but a man forced to face the consequences of his cruelty. And I, the twin they had forgotten, finally stood alight in my own truth. I caught my father's eye across the room as the next slide flickered into view, and for the first time in hours, I saw something other than pride in his expression. What I saw was surprise, a cracking of the facade he'd worn for decades. The projection behind me displayed a screenshot of his group chat with former colleagues, the one where they compared me unfavorably to Julian. The message read, "One son's a golden boy. The other's just a ghost with a keyboard." My mother's face, reflected in the screen's glow, tightened as the next image rolled in. A video clip of her at a garden party, cutting me off mid-sentence and calling me a defect as she raised her champagne glass in a toast. In that moment, I realized I was no longer the broken child they'd cast aside. I was the one holding the mirror. When I first conceived this plan, I worried that exposing my parents might fracture our relationship irreparably. But standing on that stage, battering down the walls of pretense with every slide, I felt my spine straighten in a way I never had before. The audience, once a sea of elegant guests in tailored dresses and tuxedos, now sat in stunned silence, the weight of my family's hidden judgments pressing down on them. My father, Ronald Ellery, sat at the head table, the chandeliers reflecting in his eyes as if to spotlight his shame. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He was mute before the evidence of his cruelty. I stepped forward, microphone in hand, and let my voice resonate through the hushed room. "You raised two sons," I began, keeping my tone even though my pulse thundered in my ears. "One you inflated with praise until he believed he owned the world. The other you tried to erase with jokes and silence." I paused, letting the significance of that truth settle like dust in the crystal chandelier light. But tonight, the world is listening to me. Behind me, the live stream counter continued to climb. 1, 250, 000. 1, 275, 000. Each new viewer a witness to the reckoning unfolding in a ballroom once defined by decorum and sugar-coated lies. My mother, Celeste, a woman whose very poise had been engineered to project perfection, reached for her husband's arm. Ronald's grip tightened as though he feared the tables would turn once more. I felt a surge of compassion amid my resolve. This wasn't merely about shaming them, but about uprooting a legacy of emotional abandonment so that something healthier might grow in its place. They had taught me that love was conditional, contingent on success, on fertility, on silence. But I refused to perpetuate that cycle. I tapped the screen, and the slide changed to highlight the founding of my nonprofit, The Quiet Uprising, complete with photos from community events and testimonials from men who had found comfort in our resources. There were images of workshops where survivors of emotional abuse shared their stories beneath a banner reading, "Your Voice Matters," followed by snapshots of fundraising galas where we had raised money for counseling services. I watched as recognition flickered across the faces of the guests. Some faces that, just moments earlier, had worn smug amusement now mirrored genuine respect. "With your donations," I said, "we've helped hundreds reclaim their dignity. We've provided safe houses for those fleeing toxic homes. We've connected survivors with therapists who specialize in trauma. This is what real fatherhood looks like." I let that question hang in the air. Father of the Year, right? Even though hundreds of miles of invisible distance separated me from the deserving honoree I invoked. I looked directly at my parents, letting each word land like a soft but indelible hammer. "You taught me that being broken was shameful. You told me I was unworthy of empathy. But a broken man who speaks his truth can mend the world around him. A broken man who stays silent only deepens his own wounds." I felt the room exhale, a collective release of the tension that had coiled through every conversation, every family gathering, every forced holiday. My father's posture slumped, the weight of unacknowledged remorse pulling his shoulders down. My mother dabbed at a tear, the emblem of composure undone by a simple, unflinching truth. Then, in a moment that surprised even me, I extended an olive branch. "I'm not here to sever all ties," I said quietly, "but to rebuild on a foundation of honesty." I stepped down from the podium, the click of my heels echoing through the now quiet hall. I walked toward table 9 and reached out to touch my father's hand. He flinched, as though my gesture surprised him, but he didn't pull away. I sat, keeping his hand in mine for a heartbeat longer than social decorum would typically allow. I turned to my mother, and our eyes met, hers glistening with unshed tears, mine clear with resolve. The live stream clock ticked on. 1-300-000. 1,325,000. Behind me, my story continued to ripple outward, sparking conversations in living rooms and late-night chats across the globe. I removed the microphone from my jacket pocket, and though the public forum had closed, the intimacy of that gesture felt almost sacred. We rebuild by speaking truth to power, by refusing to let shame dictate our worth. I whispered, more to myself than to the room. And in that moment, I realized that by holding my parents to account, I had liberated myself from the emotional gravity that had held me earthbound. My father cleared his throat. A small, uncertain sound that felt like a first step. He opened his mouth and exhaled, as if he were unlearning the habit of silence he had insisted on for decades. My mother squeezed my father's hand as though to support him through the uncharted territory of apology. I didn't need the words. The gesture was enough. I leaned back in my chair, allowing the currents of change to wash over me. At table 9, surrounded by the remnants of an extravagant celebration turned confessional, I felt the quiet triumph of self-recognition. My parents, flawed yet capable of remorse, were transforming before my eyes. Julian, wounded and chastened, sat nearby, his own pride dismantled. And I, once the invisible twin, the family ghost, had found not only my voice but the power to reshape the family I was born into. Fatherhood, loyalty, love. They were no longer abstract ideals reserved for the golden child. They were living, breathing responsibilities that belonged to us all. And tonight, as I watched my father's shoulders relax for the first time in years, I understood that redemption began not in a lecture hall or a newsletter, but in the quiet shift of a parent's heart. I felt the room tilt beneath me as the last of the guests filed toward the exit, their shoulders heavy with the weight of what they'd witnessed. The Silvercrest Grand's chandeliers glowed like stars caught in glass, but they offered no comfort now. The laughter and clinking of champagne had given way to silence and hurried footsteps, as though everyone wanted to distance themselves from the unraveling spectacle they'd just survived. I stood at the edge of the dance floor, heart pounding so loudly it felt like it might thunder in my ears, and watched as Riley slipped out of her chair without looking at me. She moved past servers stacking plates, past clusters of stunned onlookers, toward the French doors that led to the garden terrace. I hesitated only a second before following, my phone still in hand and the live stream still humming with activity behind me. Outside, the night air was cool and fragrant with jasmine. The glass doors reflected my face, sharp lines of triumph mingled with exhaustion. I saw the flush of adrenaline in my cheeks, the set of my jaw, and I realized that I had finally stepped free of the shadow of silence that had bound me for so long. Riley stood alone under a wrought iron gazebo, her back to me. Moonlight filtered through the latticework, painting her hair in silver. I approached quietly, each footstep a reminder that some chasms can't be bridged merely by honesty. Yet I needed her here, if only to witness that the man she once fled had found his voice and dignity. "Riley," I said softly, voice cut by the night's hush. She turned, eyes wide and glistening, a tremor in her lips I'd never seen before. "I didn't mean to push you away again," I confessed, stepping into the pool of lamplight. Tonight wasn't just for them. It was for us. For every moment I stayed silent, and every moment you couldn't watch me break. Her gaze fluttered away, as though my words were both balm and blade. "I watched you," she said, voice quivering. "I watched you stand up to them. I watched you claim the respect you deserve. And I realized I ran because I couldn't bear to see you suffer alone. But you made them suffer your truth to save yourself." She paused, taking a breath as though to measure the distance between apology and forgiveness. "I'm proud of you, Marcus." The tremor in her words felt like a starburst in my chest. I reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Thank you," I whispered, meaning every syllable. Around us, the garden lay hushed in night's embrace, but beyond those hedges, the ballroom doors stood open, revealing the empty tables and the flicker of technicians powering down equipment. Silent Echo's glow had dimmed in that banquet hall, but its pulse continued to race in the digital world. Comments streaming in by the thousands, donations building the foundation of the quiet uprising, lawyers reaching out to offer pro bono counsel for survivors. I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked the viewer count, 1,350,000 and climbing. The numbers blurred, but the message was clear. People were listening, and they cared. Riley slipped her hand into mine, her palm warm against my cold fingers. "Let's go back," she said, voice steady now. "Show them that truth isn't just a weapon of exposure. It's a force for healing." I nodded, pulling her close for a brief embrace beneath the moonlit trellis. Inside, the last server stacked the final plate, and my family sat in stunned reclamation of their emotions. My brother Julian at the head table, his face drawn in lines of regret. My mother clutching her purse as if it might hold an excuse. My father watching me with the hollow pride of a man forced to see his son for the first time. They made no move to rise as we re-entered, but their stillness spoke volumes. The scales of their judgment had been upended, and they were left to confront the mess they had made. I led Riley back to table 9, pausing only to whisper a heartfelt "thank you" to the venue manager, who had quietly ensured my flash drive replaced the wedding slideshow without batting an eye. She gave me a small nod of respect, an ally in the labyrinth of social expectations. At our table, glasses of untouched wine waited as though time had frozen when I first stood. Julian slumped in his chair, shadows under his eyes betraying his late-night panic to salvage his reputation. When our eyes met, I saw something unfamiliar in his gaze: remorse. His lips parted as if to speak, but he settled for a nod so slight it was almost imperceptible. I sat, the click of my chair echoing softly in the now empty ballroom. Servers began to clear the tables, and the acoustics made every movement resonate like finality. I pulled Riley's chair out for her, and when she sat, I felt the comforting solidity of shared purpose. This night had begun as a display of my family's pride and ridicule, but it had transformed into a crucible where my truth had forged something stronger, my own self-worth. I raised my glass to Riley and then to Julian, my parents, and the scattered few who lingered in the aftermath. To new beginnings, I said, not as a toast for Julian's marriage, but as an acknowledgement that mine was just starting. The clink of crystal met the soft hum of deconstructing illusions. Outside, the valet stood ready, cars idling like forgotten promises. My phone buzzed again, messages of support, invitations to speak, offers to collaborate. I slipped the device into my pocket and turned back to the quiet faces at the head table. I realized that forgiveness and accountability could coexist, that the fallout of truth need not leave only rubble. It could also leave fertile ground for growth. As the final guest departed and the grand doors closed behind them, I stood and extended my hand to Riley. "Come on," I said, voice steady with purpose. "Let's go home." Together we walked through the empty ballroom, our footsteps the only sound in reverent tribute to the night's revelations. Behind us, the echoes of a million voices whispered in the walls, a chorus that would carry forward long after the last chandelier ceased to glow. And in that echo, I found not only vindication but the promise of a future built on authenticity, resilience, and the unwavering belief that truth, once set free, can transform the world. A year has passed since the night my family's cruel laughter echoed beneath the grandeur of Silvercrest Grand, and I stand now on a different stage. A sold-out theater pulsing with anticipation. The marquee outside reads Marcus Ellery. A joke, right? The power of being the punchline, until you're not, and I can feel its weight settle around me like a cloak woven from every harsh word I've ever heard. Backstage, the hum of preparations feels familiar, the swirl of excitement, the flutter of nerves, the thrill of reclaiming my narrative. This time, I am not an unwanted afterthought at a gilded wedding. I am the draw, the reason these seats are filled. I take a slow, steadying breath and glance at the small table beside me. On it lies a stack of my book, pages inked with the story I bled onto paper, and a glass of water. No projector, no live stream counter, just the promise of connection between my voice and an audience hungry for truth. A volunteer hands me a microphone, and I smile, recognizing in her eyes the same spark of empathy I've chased for years. The late-night messages, the whispered thanks, the lives nudge toward healing, they all converge here, in this moment of genuine engagement. The curtain parts, and I step into the spotlight. The hush in the theater feels like a breath held across the world. I see faces illuminated by stage lights, strangers who found me through silent echo, a few journalists clutching notebooks, and in the front row, an empty seat reserved for my brother's name. He's not here tonight, nor my parents. Their absence is bittersweet, but it means I no longer need to write for their approval. I write for every man who felt erased, for every voice silenced by shame. I open the book at page 1, but instead of reading, I speak. My brother once called me a failure to a crowd of 300. Tonight, I stand before 1,400 not as a punchline, but as proof that the joke can turn on its teller. This is our story of being underestimated, overlooked, and undervalued. Until we decide our worth. The audience leans in, and I feel their collective pulse, a living echo of solidarity. I recount the night of Julian's wedding, weaving the memory into a tapestry of revelation and resilience. I describe the hush that fell when their slideshow morphed into my confession, the shock that rippled through every well-heeled guest, and the surge of unseen hands lifting me as I spoke. Their laughter had stung, but it taught me that words hold power only when we let them define us. I found mine, I tell them, and now I share it so you can find yours. As I speak, images from my nonprofit's work appear on a single screen behind me. Workshops where men discover their voices, support groups where tears flow freely, community events that celebrate survival. Each photograph anchors the narrative in lives transformed. A wave of applause follows, not for a scandal exposed, but for a movement born. Then I pause and invite questions. A man in the crowd asks how I found the courage to confront my family in front of a million people. I answer honestly. I realize the only audience that matters is the one that sees you when your back is turned. The rest can adjust. Laughter ripples through the hall, warm, validating. A woman asks about forgiveness. I tell her that forgiveness isn't about absolving the guilty. It's about freeing yourself from their hold. The final question comes from a young man who holds up a worn copy of my book. What do I do when they tell me I'm broken? He asks, voice trembling. I meet his gaze and reply, tell them your scars are your story. Show them that your voice, no matter how faint, deserves to be heard. The theater erupts in applause so thunderous it lifts me off my feet. I close the book gently, my heart full. Under the spotlight, I feel the quiet triumph of self-recognition. I am no longer the twin they forgot. I am the twin who found his voice. As the curtain falls, I know this isn't the end of my story, it's the beginning of countless others. Tonight, we learned that being the punchline can be the prelude to a punch-for-punch victory over silence itself.